After our work in May with creating data fields, Dawn put the fields in a couple of tables. I also put them in a series of portable tables, and I brought the portable database to the McIntire reunion to do field gathering demo. These are some of the fields that we looked at. These are the fields and the tables that Dawn had created. These are the tables in the portable database that I had created. We never had time to do the field gathering demo that I had hoped to do. And this demonstration approaches what might have been done or what can possibly be done for gathering the data in the field. The data identified that went into Dawn's table is shown here. My data is similar to that. It just moved around to suit my personal data gathering thoughts. And it can be further modified as the group sees fit. Also, I'm using a data platform called Airtable, which is for me easy to use and portable across many platforms, including available on devices such as iPads and iPhones. I would suggest that any further tool set be available both in the field and at home. There are two ways to approach data gathering, entry and entry in the field. And one would be to write it down on paper in the field, and then once you get back to your computer, enter it with Wi-Fi access. And the other is to enter it on a device in the field that has data access, or if you don't have data access, at least record it on your device, and then when you get back home and look up the record later. This demonstration will presume a number of things. We're going to presume that we have an interest in the McIntire family. We're going to presume that when we found out about the cemetery that we're going to visit, we knew nothing specific about it, only that it was a McIntire cemetery and that it might interest us. We don't know the genealogy of the people that are interred there. We're going to presume, which might or might not be the case when we visit cemeteries, right? We're going to presume only casual familiarity with the site we're visiting, which may or may not be the case in many of the sites that we visit. And when we went there, we either wrote down the things on paper and now have access to the internet, or as we're entering the data here, or we entered the data in the field and have internet access right then and there. And in this case, we arrived on Major McIntire Road. A group of us arrived at the cemetery. We briefly surveyed the cemetery to see what we could learn. There was a prominent monument which looked newer than some of the headstone markers. We made notes of the names and dates on the memorial. The prominent surname was McIntire. This is probably a McIntire family cemetery. On the face, the first listed name was William Wallace McIntire, 1848 to 1824. That would be 1924, actually. The memorial is probably dedicated to his family group. Mary H's wife. On the side, the top listing is Major William, presumed Major McIntire, but no dates. I would be tempted to identify this as Major McIntire Cemetery because it is on Major McIntire Road. However, below is listed Sylvester, again presumed McIntire, 1812 to 1886. And this date precedes William Wallace. Thus, he is possibly William's ancestor. So let's look around some more in the cemetery. We find a number of other headstones and footstones in the cemetery, both legible and illegible. However, this one that is legible is the oldest one dated, and it is Sylvester, dated 1812. It is my experience that typically the family cemeteries are identified by the oldest identified interred male. And in this case, even though it is possible that Major William McIntire, who may have possibly been Sylvester's father and may have been buried here, his grave is unmarked in this cemetery. Therefore, this cemetery should be, and seemingly is, identified as the Sylvester McIntire Cemetery. So let's check and see. Searching Find a Grave for Sylvester McIntire, born in 1812 in York, Maine. Turns out there is a matching record. We don't always have access to find a grave in the field, but because in this demo we do have access, here I'm going to begin gathering data on my device. Similar to Dawn's data, I have a high-level general information field. I call this table burial ground. I have a name for the burial ground, and I have landowner information, contact information, but I also have other specific information that I want to save about the burial ground. And we could do this in the field, or we can do this when we get home, but since Find a Grave found Sylvester, we can look at his record and see what it says about the location. So we're going to click on the Sylvester record in the field, and we'll come back to this record later on, but let's look at the section that is marked burial right here. And we notice that it says McIntire plot 37, which we can click on. And in this Find a Grave entry, this is the Find a Grave entry for this burial ground. It's the data record, and we can enter McIntire plot 37 for the Find a Grave cemetery name. So we're going to enter McIntire plot 37 in our database, we're going to call this burial ground Sylvester McIntire, and we're going to call the Find a Grave cemetery name McIntire 37. That will be the Find a Grave cemetery name. We can get the Find a Grave cemetery number from the cemetery ID. If we scroll down on the Find a Grave site and look here, there's a cemetery ID number, 2744569. We can copy this number and we can paste it in here in our database, and we will always have this reference number then to look back in the Find a Grave site for this cemetery page. Now, where do you think that they got the cemetery name McIntire 37? Somebody entered that in on the Find a Grave site and called it McIntire Plot 37. We're calling it the Sylvester McIntire site because that's the oldest interred McIntire there. But they got this name from somewhere, and I suspect that they got it from the York Cemetery site. So let's take a look at the York Cemeteries and Family Burial Grounds map. Which is right here. This is a canonical map for families buried in York County, and it will not be useful for families buried elsewhere. We know that. But anytime we look at family burial grounds in and around the York area, we can use this map to find out information about families buried in the York area. And we know that this burial ground that we're looking at is on the York River, right around the bend of the York River, at the end of Major McIntire Road, right here in the bend of the river, and indicated on this map as 37. And that's why it's called on the Find a Grave site McIntire 37. And in fact, if you look at the key on this map for 37, you'll see it's called a McIntire burial ground, McIntire 37. So we're going to go back to our database, and the York number, we're going to put in 37, because for us that's canonical, and the York name is McIntire. If we go back to the Find a Grave site, sometimes there will be map information about its location. In this case, there is no GPS location for that site. Just so happens that when I was there, I used my cell phone to look at the GPS location, and I recorded that information as 43 degrees, 9 minutes, 44 seconds north, 70 degrees, 42 minutes, 57 seconds west, and kept that information. And if we go and we look at Google Earth, and we put that information in Google Earth, we could see on the Google Earth map where that location is. Here's that bend in the York River. Here's Major McIntire Road. Here's that field that we walked across and we did the caber toss in. And here, in fact, is that location. Of the family burial ground. So if we take those map coordinates and we copy them, we could paste those map coordinates in our database, and we have those GPS location that we can record in our database so that other people can find that location. And this is particularly helpful if a burial ground is somewhere deep in the woods or some other location that is not a address location that we can send somebody to. Sometimes we do have a street address location that we can give. I know that the Alexandria Burial Ground is at 259 Cider Hill Road, and I've been able to locate that. The closest address I could find on Major McIntire Road is 44 Major McIntire Road. So I can enter that in here. As an address location. It's not exact, but it's the closest physical address that we could give to it. We also know that the landowner, I think, is Dan Davis. So we can give a landowner name if we know it. We can give contact information. I don't know his contact information, but we can add it to a database. We could give some type of note about how to contact that person. Give them a courtesy call, give an address or phone number, or tell them to call the Micah McIntire Clan Association. And we're going to leave this headstone field alone for right now. The next table that I have, I called headstone. Don called inscriptions. It is recording the information on the headstones that we have. So we have a headstone for Sylvester and other people in the burial ground. I have these data fields that are similar to Don's. So I have this field called indicator, which we're going to skip for the moment. We'll talk about that in a minute. This locator is the field that connects it back to the burial ground or the other table that the headstone resides in. So in this case, we're going to look through the list because it's connected. It's located in the Sylvester burial ground. So I'm going to click on that. And I put in a field for the person that is recording who has recorded this information. So it's going to be me in this case. I think it's important to track who has gone out into the field and found this information. The next column is the inscription, and the inscription is really important and should be typographically correct to the headstone, not to what you think it should say, but to what the actual headstone says. For example, upper and lower case should be exactly the same as what's on the headstone. Misspellings should not be corrected, and things like abbreviations should not be spelled out. Also, you should definitely include any punctuation that's in there. So when we look at this headstone, we see that Sylvester is all in uppercase except for the C in McIntire. Born is all uppercase. June is in mixed case, and there's a period after 16 and after the 2 in 1812. Died is uppercase. October is in mixed case, and it is abbreviated. There's a period after it, a period after 3, a period after the 6 in 1886, and although it's hard to read, rest in peace is in mixed case. So we want to make sure that we indicate exactly that when we type it in. So we're going to be very careful about that when we go to the database to type that in. So we're going to do it this way. Now, I don't, in this database, have it set up for multiple lines. We'll probably include something for a picture of the headstone so that we get the multiple lines. So we're just going to have to type it in all on one line. Maybe have to do some indication for multiple lines later on, but we'll do it this way for right now. Capital J, lowercase u, and E, space 16 dot, space 1812 dot, space capital D, capital I, capital E, capital D, space capital O, lowercase c, T dot, space 3 dot, space 1886 dot, space capital R, lowercase e, s, t, lowercase I, n, lowercase capital P, lowercase e, a, c, e, is how it reads on the headstone. So that you're getting it exactly the way it was engraved on there. If there are typographical errors, you don't want to correct them. You don't want to make any assumptions about things. I have a specific list of options for condition. We can decide on what those might be. We could change those or whatever. Needs maintenance, needs minor repair, needs major restoration, is missing. Sometimes, if we go back to the site and we knew that there was a headstone there in the past and it's not there any longer, you might want to put that there. This is in pretty good condition. It's got some wear and tear, so I might put it down as fair. Attachments, You might include here an attachment of a picture or a drawing and upload those here and drop them in. I thought that you might want to include relatives buried nearby. I don't know how we might handle this field. We'll talk about that later on. At this point, we can go back to the Find a Grave site. Let's go back to the Sylvester thing here. And I'm going to copy the URL for his site. Copy it into the clipboard, and I'm going to paste it in here. Go here and paste it. And so now we have a link to that Find a Grave site. So anytime we go to this database, we can click right on that, and it will go right to the Find a Grave page. And then you might want to make any additional notes. You can see that in the past, like for example, on the Alexander burial ground, the inscription was Hannah, wife of Alexander. I made a note that her name was Hannah Langdon, or her married name was Hannah Langdon Junkins. That way, we have a reference point to what her maiden name was. So when you have a headstone that is, Mary McIntire, you have a reference back. But you'll need to add that later on because you don't in the field necessarily know the genealogy to that person, so you don't necessarily know who Mary was. So later on you might want to make a note of who that person was. This indicator for me is a field that I am using to indicate who the primary person in the cemetery was, or who their spouse was, or who the father was, or whatnot. We can talk later on about what this indicator might be, and I'll show you how it's used in another cemetery that I'm using. Right now I'm going to leave it empty for Sylvester, and we'll show how it comes up. Quick note here, you probably already saw this, and I caught it when I was going back and reviewing this, but peace in rest in peace is lowercase. We'll go back and look at it closely, but it's lowercase, not uppercase. So I needed to go back and fix that in the database before I made the mistake there. So needed to fix that, all right? So when we go back to the burial ground database, we can look at the Sylvester record here, and we can look along, and we see that under headstone now, there is this unnamed record listed here. When we click on that, we get that unnamed record that we have listed under the headstone. You'll see that this Airtable database shows there's a connection. It is Sylvester McIntire, entered by Ken Junkins. The inscription's listed here. It's in fair condition. The attachment would be shown here. Any relatives nearby. The Find a Grave connection is here, any notes, etc. So the Airtable database shows there is a connection between the headstone and the burial ground. This is where that indicator for me might come in handy, and I might put in primary because for me this is the primary person in that database, and I might include that there. Also for the Airtable database, I can use this column to add records rather than go to the headstone database. So I can add a spouse Now I don't want to add one here. I don't guess I can't do this the same way. So I can add a person like this. I can add like this. They are in the Sylvester McIntire. And we have the Rhoda headstone that we've discovered. It is Rhoda, wife of Sylvester McIntire, born May 16, 1816, died May 16, 1884. Interesting that she died on her birthday. And at the very bottom, almost hard to read, it says, "At rest." I'm not sure whether that's lowercase or uppercase. We'll have to revisit the cemetery, but I think it's probably lowercase, "at rest." That's how I'm going to enter it. In fair condition or good condition, I don't know. We'll put that in there. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to put in RHODA, wife of Sylvester McIntire, born May 16, 1816, died May 16, 1884. Yeah, there does seem to be a dot after 1884. So I'll put a dot there. At rest. Condition, I'm going to say good. I don't have attachment. Well, I could drop the picture there. I'm not going to do that right now because I haven't tested that out. Relatives, I'm not going to put that in. Find a grave link. Let's go to the Find a Grave. If I go back to this McIntire plot 37 site, we should be able to search this cemetery and we can find Rhoda. And get her Find a Grave information, copy it, and put it in the record. And I don't know her maiden name. So we're not going to put that in there right now. But you'll see that in my database, under headstone, it will now have entered this record here for Rhoda in the database. So that's what we should be able to do when we're out in the field recording information, either on paper and when we bring it back, or on our iPads or iPhones or other devices to record information about the cemetery and then keep it in a database, whether it's an Airtable database or a Google Docs database or some other database that we've got built The maintenance portion we haven't discussed yet, but later on when we go and do revisit a cemetery, then we've got field information that we could put in the date that we visited, the person that has visited it, their contact information, what work was done, we would enter in, any field notes that we've done, any attachments like photographs of the type of work that is done, the tools that were used, the tools that need to be purchased, the type of payments that needed to be made for that equipment, for that type of work, things like that. All this information should be included in there. What's missing here probably should be a contact back to the burial ground. I haven't included a link back to the burial ground again, or to the headstone, what maintenance was done on the headstone. So those types of things also need to happen in this database, where they tie this record back to the headstone or to the burial ground. So those types of things need to be tied in as well.